Welcome back to the Dr. Joey Munoz Show, where we talk about all things health and fitness. Today, we're talking about 10 things that I used to believe as a beginner lifter that I was completely wrong about. The inspiration for this podcast episode came from a post that I made where I talked about these 10 things because I was reflecting on the past 15 years, my entire lifting career. Uh, 15 years sounds like a long time. I've been doing this health and fitness thing for quite some time now. And these are 10 common myths that I see that are still perpetuated amongst people who may not have a ton of experience with lifting and are trying to build muscle and improve body composition. So I want to share what these 10 things are, as well as tips to help improve, not tips to help improve them, but the rationale behind why they're incorrect and what actually matters for each of these. Okay. Let's go ahead and get right into it. The first one, pretty controversial, is that you need to bulk in order to gain muscle, which is simply not true. First and foremost, we have plenty of research showing that you can build substantial muscle and improve your body composition, even if you're at maintenance, just maintaining your weight, and even if you are in a slight deficit losing weight. Now, there are a ton of variables that influence how much muscle you can build in these particular conditions, but it's definitely possible. And I'm not going to go super in depth in this because I've made an entire podcast episode on this before. If you search up the Dr. Joe Munoz Show, Can You Build Muscle and Lose Weight at the Same Time? That'll provide a more in depth explanation on this, but it's certainly possible. And the thing is that most people can optimize certain things about their training, about their lifestyle, about their nutrition that would make their condition more optimal toward building muscle. Okay, so for example, if you don't have an optimal training plan, if you're not training with optimal technique or optimal exercise selection, if you're not training with appropriate intensity, if you're not prioritizing recovery, right, sleep, stress management, nutrition, if you're not eating sufficient protein, if you optimize these small little variables, you're essentially improving your body's ability to build muscle and improve your body composition, right? So if there are things about your lifestyle which you can optimize, with which most of us do have things about our lifestyle that we can optimize, we can certainly build muscle without having to gain weight. Okay. And even if your conditions are pretty optimal, even if you maintain your body weight relatively stable, if you push training intensity sufficiently, if you're recovering well, you can definitely build muscle at maintenance, albeit it won't be as quick or as optimal as if you go in a bulking phase and you gain weight, right? Because if we have excess calories or excess food, we can definitely build more muscle, but you certainly don't have to be in a large caloric surplus to build muscle optimally either. Right? I think when we talk about this concept of bulking, people often think that they have to eat as much as possible. So they end up gaining a ton of weight, which results in more fat gain than perhaps you would have liked to gain in the first place. And it doesn't result in any like additional muscle growth, right? Just because you're gaining weight quicker doesn't mean that you're gaining more muscle. So I think the optimal way to maximize muscle growth is just to be in a very slight calorie surplus where you're maybe gaining a pound of body weight a month or so. Thing number two that I used to believe as a beginner lifter that was completely wrong is that muscle confusion is important for muscle growth. And I used to think that you need to switch up exercises frequently to keep your muscles guessing and growing, right? This was really popular in the early 2010s, like 2011, 2012. It was the idea that switching up exercises would result in better muscle growth because your muscles never get used to the exercises that you're doing. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. The fact is that you actually want to keep your exercises relatively consistent and keep the same sorts of exercises for a period of time of maybe 6 to 8 weeks at least to make sure that you become proficient at those movements so you can really stimulate or fatigue your muscles when you do those exercises and stimulate muscle growth. Whenever you do a new exercise, you're never really proficient at the movement, right? The first time you do a squat, it feels awkward. You don't know how to properly brace. You don't know how to maximally contract your quads. You can't go through a full range of motion because it feels strange. You're not proficient at the movement. So you'll notice anytime you do a new exercise, you get really strong at that exercise over the first 4 to 6 weeks, right? It's almost like you're adding 5 to 10 pounds every single time. And it's not because you're building a ton of muscle. It's because you're becoming more proficient at the movement. Your nervous system is learning how to execute that movement correctly, how to contract particular muscles to move maximal weight. And it takes time to become proficient at the movement. And it's when you become proficient at the movement that you can maximally fatigue your muscular system, right? So if you go from this week doing squats to then leg press to then lunges to then, and you're switching up the movement every single week, you never allow yourself to practice the movement and get good at it, right? So in fact, you don't want to be switching things up really frequently if you're trying to get stronger and build muscle. I recommend actually keeping a core set of exercises that you really enjoy and feel good and never switching them out. You can maybe switch up rep ranges, maybe you could switch up tempo here and there if you're getting bored. But when you find, one or two exercises per body part that you really enjoy, keep those in your training so you can progress over time and measure your progress over time as well. So for me, for my legs, those include things like hack squats. I always do hack squats. I've been doing hack squats for years. RDLs, I always do RDLs, right? An incline dumbbell chest press, I always do that. A pull up, I always do that. I've been doing those for years. And then I have some secondary movements that I might change every 2 or 3 months just to not keep things stale. But you definitely don't need to be changing up exercises frequently. And it is very counterproductive if you're trying to build muscle and get stronger. All right. Thing number three is, or I should say, mistake number three is that you need to have protein immediately after your training or you're wasting your workout. I think this one was also really popular in the early 2010s, this idea of the anabolic window, right? And that you essentially have a 30-minute window after your workout to get some protein in, to get some carbohydrates in, to prioritize recovery, or else your workout was useless. And I don't think this one is as popular anymore, but I still see some people talking about this. Like, do I need to have protein immediately after my workout? And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with prioritizing nutrition after your workout. And I actually encourage it, right? Because if we can stimulate that recovery process as soon as possible, then in theory, it could be slightly beneficial. But the truth is that it really doesn't matter that much, okay? As long as you're getting your total caloric intake for the day, as long as you're getting 3 to 4 solid meals throughout the day, as long as you're getting your protein in throughout the day, it doesn't matter if you have a feeding window immediately after your training. It's not going to result in substantial more muscle growth or progress if you have protein, let's say 30 grams of protein immediately after training, or if you waited an hour or two before eating again. Again, ideally, you don't have a big window of time after your training session where you don't eat, because theoretically, you do want to prioritize nutrition in close proximity to the cessation of your training session. But if for some particular reason you can't get food in, it's not that big of a deal and you shouldn't stress it at all. And what you should really be prioritizing is the totality of food intake throughout the day. There's pretty good research showing that whether you consume protein immediately after your training or an hour or two later, it doesn't really make a difference in terms of progress and muscle growth. Now, a lot of this research is relatively short term and in relatively beginner lifters, where some of these things may not matter as much as somebody who's more advanced. So that's why I say I do encourage you to prioritize nutrition right after training. But again, if you don't have protein right after your session, you're not wasting your workout by any means. Mistake number 4. I used to think that more is always better. If you just do more sets and more exercises, you grow more. And there is an element of truth to this, in the sense that more volume is associated with more growth. But there's a caveat, right? More volume is associated with more growth, given that you can properly recover and progress with the amount of volume that you're doing, right? So 2 instances here. You do so much volume because you're really tough and you go really hard in the gym that you can't recover from it. So you're not actually progressing from workout to workout because you're not fully recovering. So that hinders your progress, right? And in that circumstance, you can argue that that person would probably progress better with less volume. And then there's the flip side of that, of people that do so much volume that they don't train with sufficient intensity, right? And we know that we need to train intensely. We need to train hard because it's that proximity to failure, it's that effort that really drives progress. And so, if you're not training with appropriate intensity for the sake of doing more volume, right? If you do 10 sets of 10, if you do 10 sets of 10, you're not training with appropriate intensity, right? Because the first, you could say 5 or 6 sets, you probably could have done more than 10 reps. And in reality, we should be approaching near failure. And if we are approaching near failure, you're not going to be able to do the same number of reps from set to set. So the point is, if you're doing so much volume that it's hindering your ability to train with a sufficient intensity, then you're also hindering your ability to progress. What's important is that you find the upper limit of volume that works with your lifestyle and your schedule, that you can also recover from, so that you can optimally make progress. For me, that tends to be a little bit lower in volume. I tend to do 8 to 10 sets per muscle group per week because I like to train with very high intensity. I enjoy doing difficult compound movements, which are more fatiguing. And I also have pretty shitty sleep. Like, I wake up often throughout the night. I have woken up throughout the night for the past 12 years, probably 2 or 3 times a night. So I don't get the best rest. And we have a 2-year-old son who comes into our room at 3 a.m. Like, it's just the circumstance I'm in. I do my best to optimize my sleep conditions. I go to sleep early. I wake up at the same time. I try not to look at screens before bed. I try to relax. I go to sleep pretty easily, but still, sometimes I just don't get great sleep, and then I feel really fatigued. And then often I'm stressed with work as well, which obviously impacts my ability to recover as well. Then sometimes I'm traveling for work, and all of these things have an impact, right? So I tend to progress better with slightly lower volume than other people might think is optimal. All right, number 6 and or I should say number 5 and number 6 kind of go hand in hand. Okay. The thing that I used to believe was that compound movements with barbells were the only way to grow muscle. And on the flip side, I used to think that machine exercises were a waste of time if your goal was to build muscle. It's this whole idea that barbells are king, right? Barbell exercises are king, like barbell squats, barbell deadlifts, barbell bench press. And don't get me wrong, these are absolutely fantastic exercises. But there used to be this notion that, like, for some reason, barbells are way more anabolic. And that simply isn't true, right? Your body doesn't know, your muscles don't know if you're using a barbell or a machine. What they know is that they're contracting against force, right? And so a barbell exercise, a barbell squat can be a fantastic exercise to build your quads and your glutes and your core. But so can a leg press, and so can a hack squat. There's also this idea that, like, barbell movements work on your stabilizers muscles a little bit more. And they definitely do, because you do have to stabilize and balance yourself through space. But you also work those muscles pretty effectively on machine-based movements as well, right? I remember watching a video from Chris Jones. If you guys have been around the fitness space for a long time, you know who Chris Jones is on YouTube. And if you don't worry about it. But he put out this video a long time ago where he was trying to grow his legs, and he was leg pressing because he saw this other bodybuilder leg pressing. And so he had a conversation with the bodybuilder. The bodybuilder was like, I leg press now, but to get my legs to this size, I did exclusively barbell squats. And you have to barbell squat if you want to grow your legs. And for years, the only exercise I did for my legs, not the only, but the main one that I did 2-3 times a week, was a barbell squat. And biomechanically, I'm just not really built to squat. My quads never felt like the limiting factor when I squatted. My core did. And I felt like for years I was hindering my progress because I was so focused on just doing a barbell squat. And then when I transitioned to doing things like deep leg presses, deep hack squats, pendulum squats, I've been able to see substantially more progress in my quads because those movements just feel more comfortable for my anatomy specifically, right? So this is not bashing barbell movements, but the truth is that there is no one universal movement that is the best for a particular body part. Barbell squats are not the best for legs. Barbell bench is not the best for your chest. It might be for a particular person, but not for everybody across the board. And the truth is that machines are absolutely fantastic if your main goal is to grow muscle, because machines are relatively stable, right? Like, you don't have to think about your balance when you're doing a leg press. You don't have to think about where the bar is touching your chest when you do a machine chest press. And so the benefit of having stability is that you can really push your limits. You can really push near failure while maintaining really good technical integrity, right? You can maintain really good technique when you do these movements. It's pretty easy. And you can really fatigue your muscles, which you can argue is a slight advantage for machines over barbells for muscle growth. So nowadays I do a combination of both, right? I typically start with a free weight movement, not always barbell. Sometimes it's barbell, sometimes it's dumbbells. And then I'll follow that up with 1 or 2 machine-based movements for the same muscle, so I get the best of both worlds there. Hey guys, some of you may not know that I'm the scientific advisor for a supplement company called Outwork Nutrition. I help with the formulation of new products to help ensure that they're effective and backed by science. Like many other supplement companies out there, we don't rely on exaggerated claims or flashy marketing tactics. Instead, we let the science speak for itself. We take pride in formulating products that deliver real results, helping you achieve your fitness goals in a meaningful way. If you're in the market for supplements like protein powder, pre-workout, or recovery products, make sure to check us out at outworknutrition.com. And as a thank you for being an avid listener of this podcast, use code Joey for an exclusive discount at checkout. You can find the link to our website down in the description of this podcast episode. Remember, our goal is to empower you with science-backed supplements that truly make a difference. Choose Outwork Nutrition and elevate your fitness to new heights. All right. Mistake number seven, I should say, or a thing that I used to believe that was incorrect, was that I used to think that 12 to 15 reps is the ideal rep range for muscle growth. I used to think lower rep range were exclusively strength, 12 to 15 were muscle growth, and then anything higher than 15 reps was a waste of time for growth and it was just for endurance. That also couldn't be any further from the truth. The truth is that all rep ranges can pretty effectively grow muscle, anywhere between 5 to 30 reps in the research literature, but I would argue that the rep range is fairly arbitrary and doesn't matter that much. What matters is your proximity to failure and your effort and the amount of volume that you're doing, right? If you do 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 15, if the effort, the relative effort is similar in the sense that you take your muscle near muscular failure, those different rep ranges are going to result in in a very similar stimulus for muscle growth. Okay, so a particular rep range is not better for muscle growth. Muscle growth is a byproduct of training hard and getting stronger and lifting more weight over time. Lower reps are slightly better for strength, and higher reps are slightly better for endurance. But for muscle growth, it's fairly equal across rep ranges. Now, certain exercises, due to the nature of the exercise, simply allow for lower rep ranges, while other exercises allow or just naturally feel better with higher rep ranges. For example, heavy compound movements tend to be better in the lower rep ranges, right? Something like a squat or a bench press or a deadlift. Why? Because think about what the limiting factor should be when we train for muscle growth. It should be the muscle, right? And if you do 5 or 6 heavy reps, and you fail after 5 or 6 heavy reps, your muscles failed after 5 or 6 heavy reps. But if you're doing 20 repetitions on something like a deadlift or a squat, it's very likely that your technique breaks down. It's very likely that your cardio becomes a limiting factor. So it's substantially more difficult to target or to maximally fatigue your muscles when doing higher reps on some of these exercises. Whereas single joint isolation movements like a barbell, not a barbell, like a dumbbell curl, for example, for your biceps, tends to lend itself towards higher rep ranges. I'm not going to be doing a set of 5 reps on a bicep curl, although you could. It's just not going to be optimal, right? You're not going to get that same mind muscle connection. You're not going to get the same pump in the bicep. It's substantially better to do maybe 12 to 15 reps or even higher on something like a bicep curl because, again, you're not putting a ton of stress on the single joints and you're just going to get a better stimulus for that particular muscle. So depending on the exercise, you might choose higher or lower reps, but rep ranges do not inherently have an impact on how hypertrophic a particular set is. All right. Thing number 8 that I used to believe that I was wrong is that you have to train to absolute failure on every set if you want to progress. This is the idea of like training as hard as possible and taking every set to failure. When we look at the scientific literature, training to failure definitely results in the most hypertrophy on a per set basis, right? Like if I train a set to absolute failure compared to doing that same set and leaving 2 reps left in the tank, well, the one that went to failure probably produces a little bit more hypertrophy. But you can get great results and really stimulate muscle growth leaving 2 or 3 sets left in the tank. And in some instances, that might be optimal. Why? Well, earlier we talked about the relationship between volume, aka how much work you do, and muscle growth, right? And in general, if you can do more volume, you can grow more muscle, given that you're training with high intensity. Now, when you train to absolute failure, that can influence how much volume you can perform, right? Because if every set is as hard as humanly possible, well, I can't do as much work because I'm fatigued, right? The closer you get to failure, the more exponentially fatiguing a set is in theory. So if I take every set to failure, I'm hindering how much total sets I can do, or how many total sets I can do, I should say, because of that fatigue element. So leaving 1 or 2 reps left in the tank allows you to train with more volume, which in some instances may be better for muscle growth. What I like to do is with clients is not alternate, but increase the intensity throughout a training cycle. Let's say a client is doing an 8-week training cycle. They'll start with lower intensity, maybe leaving 2 or 3 reps left in the tank, and towards that 8-week going towards failure. So you get the benefits of both worlds, right? Yep, that's the saying. I think I'm saying that correctly. So you can alternate between slightly lower intensity, slightly higher intensity throughout a training cycle. But in general, you don't have to train to absolute failure always in order to stimulate maximal muscle growth. And I would argue that training slightly below absolute failure results in better growth because you can handle more volume. All right, thing number 9 that I used to believe that I was wrong about is that training each muscle one time per week, like old school bodybuilders, is the best way to grow. And we know that this is simply just wrong, right? You used to look in the old muscle and health magazines, and it was like Monday chest, Tuesday shoulders, Wednesday arms, Thursday legs, Friday abs, or whatever, which is funny because that's actually like 4 days of upper body training and then 1 day of lower body training. The bros are always trying to skip leg days. But if we look at the scientific literature, we clearly know that training each muscle once per week is not optimal. And the reason it's twofold, right? So let's say you want to do all your volume for your chest in 1 day, and you're doing like 10 to 12 sets for your chest in 1 day. If you train hard, after like 6 or 7 hard sets for a particular muscle, that muscle is pretty fatigued for that one session, right? So if I do 12 total sets for my chest, the first 6 are really good. I feel fresh. And then the second 6, I'm already pretty fatigued and tired. So I'm not going to perform as well as I usually would on those second 6 sets compared to the first 6 sets, right? And we know that performance is a driver for progress and muscle growth. So it makes more sense to take those 12 sets and break them up. 6 sets in one session, 6 sets in another session. And that way I perform better overall, right? Which results in more progress. The other reason why training once per week isn't optimal is because as a natural lifter, your muscles recover probably after 3 to 4 days of training them, maybe 2 to 4 days, depending on how hard and how much volume you're doing, right? So if I train my chest on Monday and I'm fully recovered by Thursday, it makes sense to train it again, right? To be optimally stimulating muscle growth throughout the week. Right? So you're just missing opportunities to grow if you're just training a muscle once per week. Twice per week seems to be substantially better than once per week. Now, based off the research literature, training a muscle more than twice per week doesn't seem to be better than twice per week. Like training it 3, 4, 5 times per week doesn't seem to be better than twice per week. Although in some instances, I do think it makes sense. For example, I'm currently training my legs 3 times per week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with lower volume, simply because I want to. And it's funny because I was talking about squats earlier, but I want to get better at squatting. So I'm doing one set of hard squats on each of those days and then following up with some additional volume on some machine movements. But I do think there's something to say about higher frequency for strength specifically, right? Like if you train a movement more frequently, you become more proficient at it because you're practicing it more frequently, which in theory might help you get a little bit stronger at that movement, a little bit quicker. And we know that strength is also a metric that helps with muscle growth, right? If I can lift more weight on a particular movement, I should, in theory, also build more muscle because I need more muscle to be able to lift that heavier weight. I think higher frequency can be a useful strategy for more advanced lifters, although it probably doesn't have a massive difference compared to just training a muscle twice per week. All right, and thing number 10 that I used to believe that I was wrong about is that having 6 small meals throughout the day is ideal to stay anabolic. There was this idea that you had to constantly be eating small meals to keep your metabolism high and stay anabolic. And it's just not true. And when you learn about simple metabolism, you understand how silly this concept is. Because when you eat food, it's not like you eat food and use it immediately, right? We always have nutrients in our bloodstream. Digestion is a slow process. The stuff that I eat right now is not the stuff that's in my bloodstream and that my muscles are using right now. Because again, digestion is a slow process, right? And we have food and nutrients traveling through our intestines 24/7. And there really isn't any difference between eating 2 meals per day or 6 to 8 meals per day for muscle growth or for your metabolism or for staying lean at all. When it comes to meal frequency, I tend to recommend just sticking to a meal frequency that works for you and your lifestyle. I think 3 solid meals plus a snack is what's feasible and normal for most people, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, maybe a snack between lunch and dinner, something like that. That's what I typically do. I used to do all the very small meals and it just becomes so tedious, it's so difficult, and it's completely unnecessary. So when it comes to meal frequency, just find something that works for you and your lifestyle and make sure you're eating an adequate amount of calories, getting your protein in, focusing on your fruits and veggies. Those variables are substantially more important than the number of times that you eat per day. All right, guys, that's going to wrap this up. If you enjoyed this episode, by the way, I would greatly appreciate if you shared it on social media and tagged me. Let me know, okay? And the reason why I'm asking is because I'm kind of running a little bit of an experiment right now where I used to do a lot more interview style episodes, and I want to do a little bit more of these solo based episodes where I'm just providing actionable tips rather than going like super in depth in science, right? Like telling you 10 things that you should focus on for training or how to manage your hunger satiety, short action based tips. If you enjoyed this episode, Again, just so I can get some feedback, please, please, please share it on social media and tag me. And if you wouldn't mind, rate the podcast and leave a review. It really does help me a ton. By the way, guys, if you have never downloaded my free ebook, if you have goals around losing body fat, building muscle, improving your body composition, I have a completely free ebook that I would love to give to you. It's down in the description of this episode. Click the link and download it. And let me know what you think. Shoot me a message on Instagram. All right, guys, I'll catch you in next week's episode. Peace.